Yeah, it was all smiles and friendly and complimentary last week between President Trump and Xi. But of course, that disguises the substantive behavior of both parties, which is to act in furtherance of their respective interests and at odds with the interests of each other. So, for example, Xi said, that we'll have a productive relationship, a productive bilateral relationship, if Taiwan is handled properly. If it is handled properly, the bilateral relationship will enjoy overall stability. Otherwise, the two countries will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. A little saber-rattling by Xi in the direction of Trump over Taiwan, and yet, oh yes, Xi is a great leader, and we have a great relationship, and we don't want, the last thing we need right now is a war 10,000 miles away. But Taiwan's president yesterday stressing that arms purchases from the U.S. are, quote, the most important deterrent, unquote, of regional conflict and instability. We thank President Trump for his continued support for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait since his first term, including the continuous increase in the scale and amount of arms sales to Taiwan. So, the backslapping belies policymaking that does not meet with the approval of both parties. I mean, it's the same thing we talked about a bit earlier in the program with Stephen Bucci, the suggestion that Xi made that, well, golly gee, if there's anything I can do to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz, I certainly will do it. And yeah, I certainly agree with you that we don't want the Iranians to have nuclear weapons, but will Xi do anything in furtherance of those two alleged shared interests? Seems doubtful. For more on this topic and related matters, Geoffrey Cain joins us. He's the author of The Perfect Police State, an investigation into China's surveillance dystopia, which Brett Baer, Fox News, got a taste of. And he's also the author of Steve Jobs in Exile, The Untold Story of Next, and the remaking of an American Visionary. That's available tomorrow, May 19th. Geoffrey Cain, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to be here, Dan.
So what was your postmortem on the momentous summit?
It was an ambiguous summit. It was interesting because most summits you go in and you come away with a trade deal or a sale. In this case with China, it would be selling U.S. soybeans or, airplanes, Boeing airplanes to China. There's always some kind of trade or manufacturing element to these summits. But this summit was an unusual one because it wasn't about any of that. It was really about the energy of the meeting. This was President Xi Jinping's attempt to assert China as an equal, as a great civilization that stands side by side with the United States. That was his goal. He didn't give Trump very much to work with, and neither side really made any concessions, but the goal was for China's internal propaganda, for the Chinese Communist Party to show worldwide that it's growing, that it's getting stronger. The idea is just to show that we are equals with the Americans, and they're traveling all the way to Beijing with all these CEOs, this whole entourage of CEOs, and they're going to meet with me now as equals. So China is rising.
Well, yeah, right. Although you can look at it the other way, too, which is you think just so you know, the world's leading entrepreneurs, they're all part of my posse, FYI. So a little bit of show of force from Trump, too, bringing all of those CEOs, starting with Musk, over there. But there was no trade deal, but there was sort of overtures, though. They're going to buy more soybeans. They're going to buy 200 Boeing planes and stuff, but nothing ink. So, what that really materializes into is anybody's guess.
Right, and that's what everybody's asking now. It's not totally clear where this is headed, but the summit does signify, well, what the Chinese side is saying is that it's a reset, that, we're going to have some pragmatic ways going forward. They tend to use this language in their statements, but really, I looked at the things that they put out on the Chinese side, and the way that they see it is, we are going to assert our muscle now against the Americans, and we're going to we're going to be here in Beijing. We're going to be here side by side, and we're not going to bend towards them. So it's kind of it's an awkward stalemate. There's not really much going forward right now, and also some people were saying that the war on Iran might be resolved with Chinese diplomatic pressure on Iran. But none of that happened. So it's really a moment now of a reset, and we're going to see what happens next.
How do you think our allies in the Far East, like Japan, received the summit and what occurred?
They did not receive it well because they felt, I believe, that President Trump was a little too ambiguous on those Taiwan arms sales. Those arms sales are currently on pause, and it's not clear if they're going to go forward. Asian allies hope they do. The Japanese Prime Minister recently invoked the language in Japanese law that would allow Japan to come to the collective self-defense of Taiwan if China were to invade it. But the problem now with that is that they're wondering, is America going to show up and help defend them if it really comes to that? The Japanese Prime Minister saying that is significant because it means she's made a public commitment to defending Taiwan, and now she's going to have to stand by it.
One thing that was mentioned, it hasn't gotten a lot of discussion, but I think it's controversial in some circles and probably should be in more, which is this idea that there was a green light given to NVIDIA to sell their chips to a half a dozen identified Chinese firms, which of course are Chinese Communist Party state firms. Per your book on the police state, that is China, and also the AI arms race, should we be green lighting NVIDIA chip sales to the Chinese?
No, absolutely not. That's a terrible idea because the Chinese government is trying to get access to the most advanced AI chips right now. They want to achieve AI supremacy, and their goal is to, dominate with that. So what that means when I say dominate, what it means is they want to build a perfect surveillance state that spreads across China and that they can also export to other countries. Think 1984, that's what they're trying to go for. And the other thing that they want is, Chinese military strength. So they want to be a dominant worldwide power. They've become, over the last decade, far more aggressive in their overseas expansions. There have even been Chinese police stations found in New York City. A mayor is in California who is now alleged to be a spy acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. You can see there's aggression here. This is not just normal diplomacy, and we don't want to hand our biggest weapon, which is AI chips, to the Chinese Communist Party at all.
Well, just on the surveillance state, in case people missed it, Brett Baer, of course, from Fox News, went over there with his crew, and he got a first-person taste of it. Take a listen.
Big Brother is watching. There are literally cameras everywhere in Beijing. We are outside the Hadian station, and I can count at least 20 on this corner. In fact, in Beijing, they've added 1,500 cameras just this year alone. They see everything. There's nobody jaywalking here because they could get a ticket right away. In fact, our driver parked illegally for 2 minutes, and he got a message on his phone that he got a ticket for about $40 US because they saw it on the camera. Now, there are real questions what the CCP's goal is about citizen tracking and social scoring. They say it's to make everybody feel safe. These cameras are watching every minute. They're everywhere. And while they're watching us here in China, we hope you continue to watch. Special report from Beijing.
I don't think there's any real question about what the Chinese Communist Party intends with that surveillance state, is there?
There's no question at all. That's the stated goal of the Chinese Communist Party. They want to have a total surveillance state. They want to be able to monitor every square meter, every citizen in the country. They monitor them overseas. In my own reporting, I've been overseas looking at Chinese influence in other countries, and I've run into my fair share of Chinese intelligence agents and people who are watching on local Chinese communities. So yes, the goal is absolutely total surveillance, and we don't want to give sophisticated AI chips to state-linked entities, many of which are actually sanctioned, who are just going to use it to build the surveillance state even further. AI is probably the most powerful tool in human history when it comes to surveillance, and you don't want that in the hands of the Communist Party of a hostile authoritarian nation.
Do you think Trump missed an opportunity to remind the world that the Chinese Communist Party are totalitarian thugs, including Xi, not maybe in those terms, but by just raising the specter of Jimmy Lai and calling for his release?
Well, I think that, that's something that we could even go stronger on, because the level of authoritarianism in China has been getting greater and greater ever since Xi Jinping took power. Xi Jinping is now more than a decade into his reign, almost 15 years now, and his next party Congress is coming up in about 18 months. And what that means is that he's probably going to be reelected in China, reelected by the party, not by the people, because there's no democracy there. And so Xi Jinping is setting himself up to quite possibly become president for life of China. And that's entirely new. I mean, even by Chinese standards, they have not had a president for life in many, more than a century.
What about the reported structural problems, unsurprising given it's centrally planned, of the Chinese Communist Party's economy, including the fact that it is particularly dependent on exports, and the combination of tariffs plus energy supply have exacerbated those structural problems, including inflation in China. Is that what Xi is trying to paper over when he invokes the Thucydides trap and suggests that China is the rising power coming to meet the declining power of America?
That's exactly what he's trying to get at, and there's a reason for that. The reason the Chinese Communist Party holds power is because it convinces its people that it is the source of massive economic growth, that the economic growth that China has witnessed over the last 20 years will continue. The Chinese Communist Party is the steward of that growth. That's what they tell their people in the local news and the local propaganda. And so, if the economy slows, that immediately becomes a headache for Xi Jinping. He's going to have to figure out a way to continue to convince his people that the Chinese Communist Party should continue. And so when problems like, there are falling property prices, there's an aging population now in China due to the one-child policy. Yeah. The Chinese economy has a lot of deep-seated structural problems, also high debt levels that are often masked by false accounting and shell companies. The Chinese economy is not as good as we tend to see from the outside because it's such an opaque country and you can't really go in and get reliable data. But Xi is a bit worried about this decline happening for China, and that's one of the reasons why he puts on his strong face against the Americans. The goal is to show both the world, show Chinese allies, and show the Chinese people that we are strong. And when he says we are strong, he's referring to we are a great civilization, a 5,000-year-old civilization. That's the kind of language that he uses with his people. So he's trying to establish that by nature, the Chinese, the civilization of China is old and great, and it will continue in its glory. And the Americans are just here for the time being, but it's a tired and declining empire.
Geoffrey Cain is the author of The Perfect Police State, an investigation into China's surveillance dystopia. Also, new book, Steve Jobs in Exile, The Untold Story of Next and the Remaking of an American Visionary, which is available tomorrow, so pick that up at all the usual spots. Geoffrey Cain, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be here, Dan.
And he joined us on the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
When I was feeling the stress of too much credit card debt, I looked at two different options: debt settlement and debt management. They may sound the same, but guess what? They're not. Debt settlement seemed like a quick fix, but I found out it would destroy my credit.